Newcomb. Yeah, let's dig into this one. Committee, Councillor Wainwright, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And first thing, thanks to staff. Good report, a lot of information in there, and some good ideas. And I guess there are two things that I'd actually like to have the committee discuss. And I'll start it off by saying that the major difference between the report that I brought forward in the fall and this one is that I was coming from the understanding that short-term vacation rentals were permitted under existing zoning bylaw, and then kind of everything built from there. And I guess the reason I did that was that we had individuals coming forward expressing concerns, for roughly a year about one particular location, and they'd been advised that the town couldn't do anything about it because it was legal under the zoning bylaw. So to see that staff have done the research and now are quite firm that it's not legal under the zoning bylaw is going to be quite welcome news for that one particular group of residents. But that actually opens up a completely different thought to me. If, basically what we're proposing is that enforcement is going to be by complaint. We've had a limited number of complaints up to this point, and short-term vacation rentals are illegal under the zoning. So why do we have to change the zoning bylaw at all? Why don't we just start enforcing it where we have complaints and kind of call it done? Because, and I'm not saying necessarily that we don't go the route that staff are suggesting. What I'm just saying is, and I'm not being facetious about this, that there is another option. We haven't had a large number of complaints. Why should we go through the effort of zoning bylaw, public hearings, all that kind of stuff, when we've got a regulatory regime now where we can deal with it if we choose to? And we can, if we find that that's not working as well as we want, at some later time we can move forward and actually implement some additional regulation. But, it seems to me that's not an unreasonable idea, and maybe we should have a conversation about it.
Councillor Rockefeller, please.
Well, I'm pleasantly surprised at that comment, because one of my options was I would support doing nothing. This is a very complicated and complex activity. I mean, the whole idea is to release housing stock to the lower rental quartile, and I mean, it's a good aim. The townhouses, condos, and duplexes are all handled under strata, so you get rid of that, you're down to private houses. And as happens in these circumstances, you're going to have a budding underground economy in this particular thing, and it's the enforcement thing, and I just hate spending a person year on something like that, because that would be the bill if we had to do that. So I'm quite happy to support Councillor Wainwright's comments there. If we've got something that we get the complaint, it's like our parking, 24 hours, we get somebody to move their car. But it's driven by the neighbors who actually know what's happening in their neighborhood. So I'm not unhappy with that, actually, because I thought what we're proposing here was a bit too complicated for me. Thank you.
Councillor Chad?
Through you to staff, what do our neighboring municipalities do?
Through the chair to Councillor Chad, a lot of them are presently taking our approach, which is muddle through, so to speak. I think Victoria and most recently Vancouver have sort of been setting the tone for, I would say, non-vacation oriented communities, and both Vancouver and Victoria have taken the approach of they are not permitted in secondary dwelling units at all.
Mr. Chair, what I'm getting at is what does Central Saanich and North Saanich do?
I don't believe they have any regulations at this time.
If I may, one more. Are they talking about it at all? Or are they silent?
To my knowledge, they're not having a public discussion about it, no.
Thank you.
Councillor Bremner Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To play devil's advocate in this particular discussion, short-term vacation rentals can be seen as a type of mortgage helper, and when you look at the end of the spectrum of the affordability, if somebody is trying to pay down a mortgage and they have a secondary suite that they can rent out with potentially higher income or premium on the suite, that could be seen as a benefit to affordability. So I am feeling more comfortable with staff's approach, so that, you know, we're not encouraging it, but we're not saying it's illegal either. I'd like to consider a middle ground, I guess.
Councillor Wainwright.
And I appreciate you raising that particular point, because the idea of short-term vacation rental as a mortgage helper is a real thing, and as staff commented, it appears that people can make more money off a short-term vacation rental than a classic long-term rental. I would point out that the staff recommendation is to do what Victoria is doing, and it would not be legal in a secondary suite or a carriage house. So I kind of had two ideas that bracket the staff recommendation. One was we either do nothing and just deal with complaints under the existing zoning bylaw, and the other one is if we're going to set up a regulatory regime, maybe it's a bit too restrictive to say you can't do it in a secondary suite, because I'm pretty confident we have people out there now who've got short-term vacation rental secondary suite as a mortgage helper, and if they're maybe just getting by and we take that away, that could be a bit of a hardship.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of advocate kind of bookending the staff recommendation. We either you know, basically say we're going to deal with complaints under the existing zoning bylaw, or we're going to say we're going to take action because we want to encourage stuff getting back into the rental stock. We'll set out some clear rules, but I'm leaning towards we should make it legal in secondary suites, as long as they're not causing complaints. That it seems like it might be fair ground.
Mayor Price.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree with everybody's points. The problem is both points are right, and both options would benefit a certain group. But, you know, if we don't act on this to some degree, basically what we've done for all our work over the last 4 years to try to bring more housing stock and a variety of housing stock and micro suites and, you know, things that are affordable. You know, unfortunately, the Airbnbs of the world are taking out all of the affordable rentals that, you know, people who haven't made an investment in real estate and they need someplace to rent, or if you're on a basic pension or the housing allowance or whatever, all of those are vanishing, right? So, and then that, of course, gets thrown back onto society, because now where do we house all these people? Because we've taken away the housing stock because of, you know, the invention of Airbnb. I watched an interesting program. It was CBC. It was called the I forget the name, just slipped past me there. But, you know, Airbnb has $31 billion a year funneled into California from around the world. And this program, it was called the Disruptors. That's what it was. And I was watching this, and it showed Barcelona, where there's virtually riots going on because all of the people who used to have, you know, fairly low-cost housing, it's all gone. It's all gone to tourists now, right? And now there's no place for the people from Barcelona to live. There's a place for tourists to live in Barcelona, but not for the working people. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, who do we help out? Do we help out Airbnb, or do we help out our local residents who need to have an affordable place to live? So I just wanted to throw that into the discussion, because it's not quite as simple as just, oh, we'll just let it go and don't enforce it. I mean, where are these people going to live, right? We're all getting punted out on the street, and they are. I mean, because the next option after this is you're out on the road, right? You're down to the open door in Victoria. Actually, I see Tim has got a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mr. Chad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't sure where to throw this in, but I just wanted to refresh on the context a bit. This has been developing very fast. Corey was speaking in 2011. It almost didn't exist. So one of the challenges staff had in preparing this report is we can't point to a jurisdiction and say, those guys have it nailed. That's what we should do. So everybody's to some extent in experimental mode here. So there's a high level of uncertainty. There's a lot of speculation about if we do this, then this will be the result, but we don't know for sure.
Mr. Humboldt.
Yeah, and I think one thing this process is illustrated, and I think even Councillor Wainwright touched upon it. I think he showed some statistics in terms of how this has grown rapidly in Sydney, and clearly illustrated that point. And I guess the development of a regulatory framework does a couple of things. One, it clearly articulates what the ground rules are moving forward, but it also allows for a very clear public education piece in terms of it. And I think where we don't want to maybe land ourselves in hot water is a whole bunch of people investing in property in Sydney thinking that we have a framework that's established where they can go ahead and do that if we're silent on it. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I appreciate the value of potentially just acting on complaints, and we've had very few complaints to date. What concerns me, though, now is with the rapid expansion of Airbnbs, what's it going to look like a year from now or 2 years from now? And are we going to be in a situation where all of a sudden we're really behind the 8 ball? And that's sort of what concerns me. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It isn't a black and white situation. I mean, we just a few months ago we heard from several residents, especially those living in stratas and duplexes where you only have 2 owners. It's very difficult in that circumstance to say that the strata council is going to have a vote and see with a majority. If you've got 2 owners, one owner is running an Airbnb without a homeowner occupant in the space, and the other one, this is their prime residence. It changes the entire demeanor of their life. And a duplex is a little bit closer than a single family residence, especially when they... So I think we do need to look at some sort of regulation. We need to tighten it up a little bit, because on the same hand, I get the tourism aspect, I get the mortgage helper part, but there has to be something that's better than what we have been doing. I think it needs to be formalized. Thank you.
I'll just say an interesting sort of situation here is that this sort of came up because we actually had a gentleman who's come more than once with complaints about noise. And I mean, the housing issue aside, originally we started to get aroused by this because of the fact that we had a situation where there is someone that doesn't live in the house, that people are coming, and I get it, you know, you show up, it's the weekend, party, the beers are out, and you're not thinking about the neighbor. And so these neighbors are really kind of getting down on this. So part of me feels that, you know, you also, on the other flip side, you have a situation where you may have a young person that has bought their first home, and they have a rental suite in it, and they go, ooh, wow. The other interesting part about this is that currently we're looking at these sites, Airbnb, other sites that offer this. But the reality is there's a lot of people that are on Use Victoria, Kijiji, things of this nature that are off that radar of, and even if the province was to say we are going to put some regulation in here and charge people for this, there's all these people under the radar that are just, you could just type in short-term rental that comes up on Use Victoria. So how does someone sit, like, it's just a massive undertaking to try and control this thing. So, you know, part of me feels, and you know, in speaking to the mayor's points about, you know, these smaller units getting rented out, you're not living in that unit, so, and it's not a secondary suite, so you can't do it there. A secondary suite, you have someone living on that property. Someone is upstairs, someone is there, and if the people are, you know, just if I was renting somewhere on a short-term rental and I realized the owner was living upstairs, I'm probably going to be a little less, you know, in party mode. So, personally, for me, the reality of this conversation is that this came to us because of complaints of noise originally. And yes, I get the housing portion of it, but I just, it's such a big one. I just don't know. Mayor Price.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's really a catch-22. But I know I was looking through the Airbnb listings there, it was last year, and there's one of the new condominium buildings in Sydney where there's 2 of the micro suites were bought by an American investor, right? And so it's, and we originally envisioned those to be for working people in Sydney. So, you know, so much for that, you know, that thought of councils. I guess through you, Chair, to staff, Corey, so what's the middle ground here? I mean, you're really up on this, right? And I haven't memorized your whole report yet. Can we do both here at once and still achieve our objectives?
I think it's, sorry, through the chair to the mayor. I think it's, it appears to be a complicated endeavor that is quite administratively heavy. Most of the, like the city of Nelson, most of the communities that have taken the middle ground appear to grapple with trying to balance all these things, and the people who balance all these things are the municipal staff. You know, bylaw enforcement officers who are following up very proactively on people who are operating outside of the bounds, business license bylaw inspectors who are, you know, in one case working solely on short-term vacation rentals, administrative staff who are, you know, ensuring that the 3 per block rule isn't broached, so on and so forth. That seems to be the most common middle ground, which is basically the municipality is essentially the policeman. I will, with the chair's permission, just tag on one last comment. One of the articles I read, and there was unfortunately no studies or anything to back this up, but one of the articles I read speculated on another aspect of it, which is those dollars that are flowing to short-term vacation rentals are flowing to individuals. They will not flow to a hotel who may wish to open in your community as well. So that larger investment may be dampened as a result of short-term vacation rentals. That was just another aspect of it that came up in my investigation.
Councillor Bremner Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because we're having a good discussion, could I ask through you to staff if there's any benefit to requiring a business license? Would there be useful data in collecting, you know, monitoring the numbers of business licenses, or would that create more work for staff?
Through the chair to Councillor Bremner Mitchell, it appears from communities that require business licenses for short-term vacation rentals that it's quite a labor-intensive process to get a lot of operators to actually go through the process, and compliance is very difficult, particularly I guess you would call them casual operators who, you know, for a couple months in the summer want to throw a room, or you know, their kids away at school or off working for the summer and they just want to do it casually. They don't see the value in going through the business license process. So I think there would be perhaps limited value, or it would take a lot of work to, I think, get the kind of data that you're thinking of. I think it would be challenging. based
Councillor-
on my discussions with other municipalities.
Councillor Wainwright?
So, I've got a couple of observations, you know, with the intent of trying to suggest a way forward on this. The first thing I'm going to say is the most pressing thing, I think, is being able to respond to the complaints, particularly the chronic complaint sort of stuff. And based on the staff report, that could start happening immediately, whatever option we go, whether it's, you know, go with the existing bylaw or modify the bylaw. There's nothing to stop staff from responding to complaints now. And I think people will be happy to hear that.
Yes,
If I may, just to respond to Councillor Wainwright's comment regarding staff beginning to act immediately upon complaints, that's absolutely happening, and in fact, we've initiated the file on the one complaint that we have received, so that's in the works, and so we'll begin that immediately, or have begun that immediately. Thank you.
Okay, so continuing from there, dealing with the rest of this is, to me, a lot less urgent, given that we've got staff already acting on, you know, the significant issue, the chronic complaint. So that was kind of one side of things. The second thing is, I think there's a very clear consensus among council that we do not want to take an approach that's going to involve significant staff effort, either enforcement or administrative. We're just not prepared to go that route. So that narrows the options. And even though there hasn't been any motion or whatever, you know, I'm kind of seeing a consensus on that. I'm hearing from staff that they're suggesting that we do take some kind of regulation approach, that we don't just leave it because it's such an evolving thing. We should establish some guidelines on it. So the only thing that we seem to be dealing with really is the question of, are we going to allow it in secondary suites or not? And the rest of it, I think we're fairly on board, you know, on the same page with. So we could take our time on the secondary suite issue and get some public input on that, because, you know, I'm going to argue it's not as urgent as being able to deal with the complaints, and we'll probably all feel better if we've got you know, more public input on it. So we could potentially go out to the community with, we're considering two options. One is so, you know, here's the general framework that we would be looking at rolling out, and the question we're really struggling with is, do we allow it in secondary suites, yes or no? And on the one hand, the reason for not allowing it is to ensure that those things are in the rental stock, and on the other hand, it's to allow the flexibility of it being a better mortgage helper. That seems to be it. And I'd be pretty comfortable if we go that route.
Staff, please.
Just a comment on the secondary suite issue. I was only able to find in my investigations one secondary suite out of the tens of secondary suites listed on Airbnb that would be considered a legal secondary suite. The rest of the listings that I saw were illegal suites. And perhaps this is a bit of a path forward. In order to operate a legal, if we went that route, in order to operate a legal Airbnb, it would have to be a legal suite, and it would have to potentially have a business license, which are two sort of, I guess, legitimizing boundaries that the owner would need to go through to get to the legal VRBO, STVR stage. So that in itself may put a damper on the number of STVR units operating legally within Sydney. The other ones who choose to operate illegally, either without a business license, if that was the route that council decided to go, or in an illegal suite that is, you know, not built to BC Building Code and doesn't have an occupancy permit, those ones could be potentially addressed. Just another option, I guess.
Mayor Price, you had your hand up.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and I can sympathize with Councillor Wainwright's comments there, especially about the public consultation. But I guess one thing that I want to make sure that we don't do is we don't place our staff in an unworkable position. Okay, so they need to have some tools to work with. And I don't know if by watering down what the recommendation is, if that's going to make it, virtually useless. And I really take heed from the CAO's comments about, this has all happened just in the last few years. We're up to 50 that we know of, and there's probably hundreds out there. But we really do need to have some tools in the toolbox for our staff for when this is like 200 next year and 2,000 the year after that. As and it's just all economics. I mean, if this is twice as profitable as having a normal rental unit, then this is the way they're all going to go. So then it's going to overload our staff, but they won't have the proper tools to work with it, right? So that's something we need to keep in mind as we move this thing forward.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you. If I may, through you to staff, on the section on the zoning bylaws, the last paragraph where it says the approval of the owner or strata council, do we need to articulate that if it is a duplex, that the duplex owner, because we don't have a majority, if you've got two owners, that the owner has to sign off, the neighbor has to sign off on this?
Through the chair to Councillor Fallon, yes, that would be required at some stage of approval. We would require a letter or an email if we're familiar with the individual.
So would that language be in the bylaw itself?
Either in the zoning bylaw or the business license bylaw, depending on which direction we go with licensing the units or not, as the case may be. But yes, it would be made explicit somewhere in the bylaws,
Okay.
I guess, to answer your question
Okay.
more directly.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Bremner Mitchell?
I'll make a stab at a motion, if you'd like, a two-part motion, and we can work on it as a team if we need to. That council see merit in an approach for regulating short-term vacation rentals in Sydney that permit short-term vacation rentals in residential zones considering a principal occupant reside on the property, and that staff be directed to bring forward the necessary bylaw amendments for consideration. And 2, that the public outreach process be undertaken to inform the public that council intends to take action on this issue.
Okay, but moved in second. Discussion.
Through you to staff. So staff, how does that affect your original recommendation? What does it take away from your ability to do your job if we go with this recommendation?
Through the chair to the mayor, I don't think it affects it in terms of workload and bringing bylaws forward significantly. It's a different approach to the staff report, but the changes to the bylaw itself and the public consultation sound very doable if that's the approach.
So what I'm hearing is that it would be allowed, under your motion, it would be allowed in a residential area, in either a secondary suite or in the home if it was occupied, and that obviously it would have to be, if there was an issue of a complaint and this was not a legal suite, it would be nixed, no can do, and or if it was in a in an apartment building and or in a in that area. Is that sort of what you're going for?
The only thing is I've added, so it's essentially the same motion, except I've added that it be that the principal occupant must reside on the property, and that the second part is from the staff report encouraging us to do the public outreach process. So essentially, my intention is not to change the original motion other than allowing it, requiring the principal occupant to be on site.
Councillor Wainwright.
I may be reading staff's report wrong, but my understanding was they were requiring the principal occupant on the site. So,
I'm sorry.
The way I was hearing your motion, just like the chair, it sounded like you were suggesting it would be okay in secondary suites. So I think you need to be clear. If you want to go with what staff is recommended in their report under zoning bylaw, that is principal occupant is a requirement, and staff can confirm this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Through the chair, can I clarify? So the approach in the report is the principal occupant in the unit where the short-term vacation rental is happening. What I understand from Councillor Bremner-Mitchell's motion is that you would have a principal occupant on the property, so in the main house, and then the secondary suite could be rented out.
That's what I said, on the property.
Now, just to clarify, a secondary dwelling and a apartment are very different things, so that would exclude basically all apartments unless from being rented without a principal occupant on site, obviously. You know, the studio suites that have been built, those would have to have someone living in them, and then I go sharing a bed with the. Not sure how that would work, but yeah, that distinction is important because a lot of the units are apartment units. So allowing them in a secondary dwelling unit is more of a single-family property type of situation.
Mayor Price.
Oh, yeah, I can support Councillor Bremner Mitchell's amended motion there. I think it's a good start, and I'm sure councils in future years will be revisiting this. But I mean, it seems like a good way to get things rolling anyway. So I'll be in support.
Councillor Wainwright.
So this is again a clarification kind of thing, but a lot of the short-term vacation rentals in a condo or an apartment building are because the principal occupant is going away on vacation for a month, and rather than have the unit vacant, they rent it out. And the thing about that is, if there are complaints, the neighbors make them when the occupant gets back. Yeah. And you know, the key thing about the occupant being there, or the key thing about having an occupant is so there is communication among the neighbors with the owner, the one responsible for renting it out. Now, granted, there would be a lag if you've got people in vacation mode for a month before the occupant gets back. But I don't really find that particular thing unreasonable. If you know, if an individual's gone for a month and they want to take advantage of that and rent it out, I don't really have a problem with that. I do have a problem if the owner lives in another building on the other side of town. That is definitely a non-starter. And it's not good enough if the owner lives on the first floor and the unit's on the fourth floor. That kind of thing's a non-starter. And I don't even care if it's down the hall. But I'm wondering if we really want to be so restrictive that a person can't, you know, go away for a couple of weeks and rent their unit out while they're away.
Councillor Bremner-Mitchell, please.
I agree with you that that's reasonable for people to go away on vacation and to rent out their property for a short period of time. So if I could amend my motion to say, or it be their primary residence, because if they're away and it's their primary residence, that addresses that they can't live somewhere else in town, or so they're renting out their primary residence for a short period of time.
Councilor Wainwright.
Rather than make the motion too complicated, I think if staff simply understood that's what is meant by principal occupant, they can probably deal with it. I think the key thing is that when we're voting on it, we all have clarity on what we're voting on.
So read out the motion again, please.
With this primary residence bit or without it?
I'd say without it.
That council see merit in an approach for regulating short-term vacation rentals in Sydney that permit short-term vacation rentals in residential zones, considering a principal occupant reside on the property, and that staff be directed to bring forward the necessary bylaw amendments for consideration. And 2, that the public outreach process be undertaken to inform the public that council intends to take action on this issue.
And I'll second that friendly amendment.
Councilor Chad.
This is going to be a recommendation to council, so we got a second chance to have a kick at it. And we're just going in little circles, and finally we will disappear. So I hope we can
Move forward.
vote on this now and take a look at the report. Excellent report.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll come back when it comes back to council, and we'll have another kick at it.
Well, before I, Councilor Wainwright.
Sorry, just in the same mode, staff will actually have to translate this into a draft bylaw, and that's when the full details are in front of us, and I'm sure we'll revisit carefully at that point.
I think it's also important to get some clarification on the rationale for the I guess the community engagement or the public outreach. Is it to help inform the draft bylaw? Is it simply to educate elements on the draft bylaw? So we'll have to think about the purpose of the public outreach. Is the public outreach better after the bylaw has already been approved, and then do a sort of an education piece on it? Those are just some questions that need to be thought about as well.
Councilor Brenda Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had intended, when I added that second portion, that it just be to inform the public of the changes. Whereas in the staff report, there was a recommendation to do the 2 surveys. We can certainly give that some more thought, but after this lengthy discussion, I felt that informing the public was a good way forward.
Anyone else?
Well, maybe just through you to staff. So, Corey, hearing hearing what you've just heard, are you happy, and Tim, are you guys happy with the direction you're being given from council?
Through the chair to the mayor, sure.
Yeah, okay, good.
Well, I will tell you this, staff, I am very pleased, and thank you very much for helping us wade through this extremely cumbersome issue. And we've been dealing with this for a while, and that was a great report. So without further ado, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.